Welcome back to the deep dive. It is great to have you with us again as we jump right back into the course. Bodies, systems, and stories. A critical history of medicine.
It's good to be back.
If you've been following along, you know we've been tracking this really massive arc of how humanity has tried to understand the body. We've gone from the ancient four humors, black bile, yellow bile, all that fun stuff, up to the modern anatomy lab.
That's right. We are really building a history of the medical self. And today we're tackling Lecture 13. The title on the syllabus is Neurology and the Self.
And I have to say, just looking at the notes for this one, it feels like a massive shift in gear. Last time in Lecture 12, we were deep in typhoid Mary territory. We were dealing with invisible germs, public health, and how the state can, label you a threat based on these microscopic bacteria hiding in your gallbladder. It all felt very external.
It was external. We were looking at the self as defined by invaders, by contamination.
Yeah.
But today we're moving inward. We're moving from the microscope to what I kind of like to call the geography of the soul.
The geography of the soul. I like that.
We're going to look at how we went from thinking of the self, your personality, your memories, your speech, the thing that makes you you as this sort of floaty metaphysical concept, to realizing it has a specific physical address in the tissue of the brain.
So it's the move from asking, who am I, to asking, where am I?
Precisely. And the mission for this deep dive is to really explore the tension that comes with that discovery. Because once you map the brain, once you decide that, say, morality lives here and memory lives there, you open the door to some incredible life-saving surgeries. We're going to talk about heroes like Wilder Penfield. But you also open the door to what the source material calls life-destroying hubris.
And that means we're going to be talking about the lobotomy.
We are. We have to talk about localization, the finding of the self, but we absolutely have to talk about the attempt to edit the self.
The outline for this lecture has a pretty striking title slide description that I think sets the mood perfectly. It's a juxtaposition. On one side, you have that famous, slightly eerie daguerreotype of Phineas Gage.
The man with the iron rod.
Right, holding that massive tamping iron that went right through his head. And then on the other side, you have a coronal slice of H.M.'s brain, that's Henry Molaison, showing this empty void where his hippocampus used to be.
Two men, two injuries, separated by about a century. And between them, they completely redefined what it means to be human.
So let's unpack this. Before we get to the iron rods and the brain slices, we have to establish the baseline. Slide 2 in the lecture talks about the search for the seat of the soul. I think for a lot of us listening now, it's hard to imagine that we didn't always know the brain was the boss.
Right.
Like, if you ask a 5-year-old where their thoughts come from, they point to their head. It's just obvious.
It seems obvious to us now. But for centuries, the gray matter, all that squishy stuff we now revere, was considered totally unimportant. In the medieval period, and even well into the Renaissance, if you asked a physician where the soul lived, they wouldn't point to the tissue at all.
Really?
They thought the tissue was just packaging. Or maybe a radiator to cool the blood.
A radiator?
You kidding?
Literally. Aristotle thought the brain was a cooling system for the heart, which he thought was where all the real action was. But even the people who did look at the brain didn't look at the meat. They pointed to the empty spaces inside it.
Wait, empty spaces? I thought the brain was solid.
Not entirely. If you cut open a brain, deep in the center, there's this network of hollow caverns filled with fluid. They're called the ventricles.
Okay, so why on earth did they think the soul lived in the plumbing?
Well, think about the worldview at the time. The soul is immaterial, right? It's a spirit. It's a ghost. It can't be stuck in meat. Meat is heavy. Meat rots.
Right.
If you shove a spirit into a piece of steak, it gets stuck. It needs to flow. So they thought the soul resided in the cerebrospinal fluid that was just kind of sloshing around in those empty caverns.
I see. So it's like a swimming pool for the ghost.
That is a very evocative way to put it. But yes, it allowed the soul to be in the body, but not of the body. It's the ghost in the machine, but it's literally floating in the fluid.
And this idea sticks around for a while. A very long time. It only really starts to shift in the 17th century with René Descartes. You know him, I think, therefore I am.
The French philosopher, of course.
Right, and he's trying to solve a really hard engineering problem. He believes the body is a machine. It's all hydraulics, pulleys, levers. But he also believes the soul is divine. So the question is, how does the divine ghost pull the levers of the meat machine? He needs a control stick.
A single point of contact.
Exactly. And he finds what he thinks is the perfect candidate, the pineal gland.
I've heard of that. It's tiny, right? deep in the brain?
It's this tiny little pine cone-shaped structure right in the center of the brain. And Descartes picks it for a very specific reason. If you look at the brain, almost everything is doubled. You have a left hemisphere or right hemisphere. 2 eyes, 2 ears. But our consciousness feels singular. We don't feel like 2 people.
We feel like 1 eye.
And the pineal gland looked like the only structure in the brain that wasn't paired. It sits right on the midline. So Descartes thought, aha, this must be the valve. The single point where the immaterial soul enters the chat and tells the body what to do.
So we have the soul in the fluids and the soul in this tiny gland. When do we actually start looking at the brain itself, the cortex, the wrinkly stuff?
That shift happens in the 1800s. And it brings us to a figure who is, well, he's complicated. In the history of neurology, he is simultaneously a villain and a kind of founding father. His name is Franz Joseph Gall.
I don't think I know that name. Who was he?
You might not know the name, but you definitely know his invention. Have you ever seen those old ceramic busts, usually in antique shops or, hipster cafes with the grid lines drawn all over the skull?
Oh.
And words written in the boxes like amativeness or benevolence.
Phrenology, the bump reading stuff.
The bump reading stuff.
Okay, hold on. I thought that was just a total scam, like carnival science where they feel your head and tell you if you're going to be a millionaire. We're studying that in a graduate course on the history of medicine.
We are. And you're right. It eventually became a pseudoscience. It became a parlor trick. The idea that you can feel a bump on the skull because a part of the brain is swollen with, say, generosity is just nonsense. The skull is bone. It doesn't conform to the brain like shrink wrap.
So why are we even talking about him? What's the point?
Because we have to give Gall some serious credit here. He was fighting a much older and much wronger idea. Before Gall, the prevailing scientific view was that the brain acted as a homogeneous mass.
Like a smoothie.
Exactly like a smoothie. They thought the whole brain did everything. If you damaged one part, the whole thing just worked a little less well. Gall looks at it and says, no, this is a machine with parts. He argued that the brain is a collection of organs. He identified 27 distinct organs, each responsible for a specific human trait.
So even though his map was totally wrong, even though he was drawing lines on the scalp, he was right about the basic concept.
He was right about the fundamental premise, localization, the idea that speech sits in a different place than vision. He moved us from viewing the brain as a homogeneous mass to seeing it as a map territory. He planted the flag that said, the self has a geography.
That feels like a huge turning point.
It's the big bang of modern neuroscience. But proving that the self is physical and localized, that required more than ceramic busts. It required evidence. And unfortunately, in the 19th century, the best evidence came from tragedy.
And this brings us to the connecting the dots section of the outline, the story of Phineas Gage.
Phineas Gage.
Now, I feel like I've heard snippets of this, but usually just the gory part. Guy gets a pole through his head, survives. But based on the title slide, this story is absolutely central to the whole lecture.
It is the contextual bridge. So let's set the scene properly. It's 1848. We're in Vermont. Phineas Gage is a railroad foreman, and by all counts, he is the perfect employee. He's responsible, he's a leader, he's shrewd with money. He's the guy you want running your crew.
A calm, collected professional.
Exactly. And on this one specific day, he is setting an explosive charge to clear some rock. The process involves drilling a hole, putting in gunpowder, putting in sand, and then using a tamping iron to pack it all down.
And we should describe this iron. It's not just a little stick.
Oh, no, it's a weapon. It's a crowbar, essentially. It's 3 feet, 7 inches long. It's over an inch thick, and it weighs 13.5 pounds. It's a javelin made of solid iron.
Okay, so he's packing the powder down.
And something goes wrong. A spark. The powder explodes prematurely. The tamping iron shoots upward, point first. It enters Gage's face just under his left cheekbone. It passes behind his left eye. It tears through the frontal lobes of his brain. And it exits the top of his skull, shooting out like a rocket, and lands about 80 feet away, smeared with blood and brain matter.
And he must have died instantly.
That's the thing. He doesn't die. He barely loses consciousness. He's knocked backward. He convulses a bit. But within minutes, he is sitting up. He gets into an ox cart. He rides back to town. When the doctor, Edward Williams, arrives, Gage is sitting on the porch of his hotel.
No way.
He supposedly looks at the doctor and says, "Doctor, here is business enough for you."
That's unbelievable. I mean, that is the ultimate tough guy move, but it's also just medically baffling for 1848.
It was a miracle. He survived the infection. He survived the trauma. Physically, Gage recovered. He could walk, he could talk, he could see, though he lost the use of his left eye.
Yeah.
But And this is the absolute crux of the lecture. Phineas Gage did not survive.
What do you mean by that?
The man named Phineas Gage, the responsible, shrewd foreman, he was gone. The source material quotes his friends and his doctor saying Gage was no longer Gage.
How did he change?
His entire personality completely flipped. He became fitful, irreverent, and grossly profane. He couldn't stick to a plan. He'd come up with some scheme, start it, and then just abandon it. He lost his social inhibitions. He would say incredibly inappropriate things to people.
Wow.
He became a child in his intellectual capacity, but a man in his animal passions.
So the iron rod didn't kill his body, but it killed his character.
Exactly. And this was the first natural experiment that proved localization. It proved that things like morality, planning, and social grace aren't these ethereal qualities floating in the soul fluids or the pineal gland. They are physical functions. They live in the frontal lobes. And if you destroy that tissue, you destroy those functions.
That's a terrifying thought, actually. It really brings the self down to earth, literally. It means your goodness is just tissue. And if I damage that tissue, you stop being good.
It makes the soul biological, makes it fragile. And that realization leads us directly to slide 6 and the work of Wilder Penfield in the 1930s.
Okay, so we move from the accidental destruction of the brain to the intentional mapping of it.
Right. If Gage was a sledgehammer, Penfield was a cartographer with a fine point pen. Penfield was a neurosurgeon working in Montreal, and he was treating patients with severe epilepsy.
And we have to talk about his method, the Montreal procedure, because it sounds like something out of a sci-fi horror movie.
It requires a strong stomach. Penfield's goal was to cut out the scar tissue in the brain that was causing the seizures. But he had a problem. He needed to know exactly which part of the brain to cut, and maybe more importantly, which parts not to cut. He didn't want to accidentally cut out the part that controls speech or movement.
But you can't see speech just by looking at the brain, right? It all just looks like pink walnuts.
Exactly. So he had to ask the patient. Now, the brain itself has no pain receptors. You can cut brain tissue and feel nothing. So Penfield would numb the patient's scalp with local anesthesia, saw open a piece of the skull, and expose the living brain. And the patient would be fully awake.
Conscious,
talking to him.
So you're just lying there on an operating table, smelling the antiseptic, hearing the doctors, and your brain is open to the air.
And the doctor's holding a little electric probe. Penfield would touch a specific spot on the surface of the brain with the electrode, just a tiny spark, and ask, "What do you feel?"
And what would they say?
Well, if he touched the motor cortex, their hand might twitch, or their foot might kick. If he touched the sensory cortex, they might say, "I feel a tingle in my thumb." Penfield was literally drawing a map. He would put a little number tag on the brain tissue itself. Spot 1 moves the thumb, spot 2 moves the lips.
And this gave us that famous image, right? The homunculus.
Yes, the cortical homunculus. You've probably seen it in textbooks. Is that grotesque, weird-looking cartoon character draped over the brain.
It looks like a funhouse mirror reflection.
Yeah.
It has these huge hands and this huge mouth.
Right. Massive hands, giant lips, and a huge tongue, but a tiny little torso and these spindly legs.
Why does it look like that?
Because the map isn't based on physical size. It's based on neural importance. Penfield discovered that the brain devotes a massive amount of territory to the hands and the mouth, because that's what makes us human. We manipulate tools, we speak, we need fine motor control there. We don't need much brain power to control our back muscles.
So he mapped the body onto the brain.
He did. But then, things got spooky. This is the ghost in the machine part of the lecture.
I love this part because up until now, we're just talking about twitches and tingles. It's all very mechanical stuff.
Right. But Penfield started exploring a different area, the temporal lobe. And when he touched the electrode there, the patient didn't just twitch. They hallucinated, or rather, they remembered.
This is the famous burnt toast story.
Burnt toast is the famous one. A patient smelled it vividly, but there were others. One patient heard a mother calling her little boy. Another heard a specific song, as if an orchestra was playing right there in the room. And here is the key. It wasn't like they were just thinking about the song. They were reliving the experience. It was vivid. It was real.
And if he touched the same spot again,
the record would play again. Same song, same mother's voice.
That is mind-blowing. It implies that memory isn't just a story we tell ourselves. It's like a physical file stored in a cabinet. And if you hit it with an electrical spark, the file just opens and plays.
It suggested that the self, our history, our identity, our ghosts, is literally etched into the meat of the brain. It made memory tangible. It seemed to confirm that everything we are is just stored in these little neural pockets.
Which is an incredible scientific breakthrough. But as we move to slide 7, we see the other side of that coin. Because if memory is physical, it means it can also be removed.
And this brings us to the tragedy of H.M. Henry Molaison. This is 1953.
H.M. is practically a celebrity in the psychology world, but his story is just absolutely heartbreaking.
It is. H.M. was a young man suffering from debilitating epilepsy. He had fallen off a bicycle as a child, hit his head, and the seizures just got worse and worse over time. By his 20s, he couldn't work. He couldn't live a normal life. He was desperate.
And his doctor, a man named William Scoville, proposed a solution.
A radical experimental surgery. Scoville believed the seizures were originating in the medial temporal lobes, so he decided to go in and simply remove them. Specifically, he planned to suction out the hippocampus and the amygdala on both sides of the brain.
Suction them out. Just vacuum them up.
Just remove them.
Yeah.
And looking at the MRI on slide 7, which was taken decades later, you see these black voids in the center of the brain. It's just empty space where those crucial structures used to be.
Did it work? Did the seizures stop?
In a sense, yes. The seizures were drastically reduced, but the cost was catastrophic. When H.M. woke up from that surgery in 1953, he had what is called total anterograde amnesia.
Okay, let's break that down. Anterograde means forward-looking, right?
Right. He could remember his childhood. He knew his name. He knew who the president was in 1950. But from the moment he woke up, nothing. Silence. He could not form a single new memory for the rest of his life.
So he was stuck in 1953 forever.
Forever. He lived in a permanent present tense.
Wait, pause there for a second. Permanent present tense. Walk me through what that actually looks like on a random Tuesday morning for him.
Okay. So H.M. wakes up. He looks around the room. It's unfamiliar. He doesn't know where he is. A nurse walks in. He doesn't know her. She introduces herself. Hi, Henry. I'm Sarah. He says, nice to meet you. They have a pleasant chat. She leaves the room.
And if she comes back 5 minutes later?
He greets her like a complete stranger. Hi. Who are you? Have we met?
Oh, my God.
And it gets worse. Think about the mirror. He still thinks he's 27 years old. Imagine waking up, walking into the bathroom mirror, expecting to see a young man, and seeing a 60-year-old face looking back at you. The panic, the confusion. And then 10 minutes later, you forget it happened, you do it all over again.
It's a horror story. It's a neurological Groundhog Day, but without any possibility of growth or learning.
He would grieve the death of a loved one, say, when he was told his uncle had died. He would cry. He would be devastated. Then he would get distracted. An hour later, he might ask, where's my uncle? And they have to tell him all over again. And he has to grieve all over again, as if for the first time.
That is terrifying. It's not just forgetting where you put your keys. It's a total erasure of continuity. It's the destruction of the narrative self.
It is. But, and here's the twist that makes H.M. so incredibly important to science. The lecture outline emphasizes what H.M. taught us in slide 8, because out of this personal tragedy came a massive revelation.
And this involves a researcher named Brenda Milner, right?
Yes. Brenda Milner was a brilliant neuropsychologist who worked with H.M. for decades. She wanted to see if he could learn anything at all. So she gave him a task called the star tracing test.
How does that work?
You have a drawing of a star with a double outline. The task is to draw a line between the borders of the star without going outside the lines. But, and this is the catch, you can't look at your hand or the paper directly. You can only look at the reflection of your hand in a mirror.
Oh, I've tried that. It's incredibly difficult. Your brain wants to move right, but the mirror says go left. It's a total mind bender.
It takes practice. So Milner had H.M. do this task day after day. Now remember, every single day she walked into the room, H.M. had no idea who she was. He had no memory of ever seeing the star. He had no memory of the mirror. He thought he was doing it for the very first time, every time.
So logic would say he should be terrible at it every single time.
Logic says he should be starting from zero. But he wasn't. His hands got better. He made fewer mistakes. By the third day, he was tracing the star almost perfectly. He looked at his own drawing and said something like, that was easier than I thought it would be.
That is the aha moment.
It changed everything. It proved that memory is not one thing. We used to think memory was just this big bucket called memory. But H.M. showed us that the bucket has different compartments.
So there are different types of memory, and they must live in different places in the brain.
Exactly. We learned there is declarative memory. That's for facts, names, what I had for breakfast. That lived in the hippocampus. Scoville suctioned that out, so H.M. lost it. But there is also procedural memory. That's for skills, muscle memory, how to ride a bike, how to trace a star. That lives in other areas, like the basal ganglia and cerebellum. those were still intact.
So the self isn't a monolith. It's modular. You can lose the entire story of your life, but keep the skills of your body.
It confirmed localization in the most profound way. The self is an assembly of different neural circuits. But, and this is the dark turn we see in slide 9, once you accept that the self is modular, once you accept that you can cut out a piece of tissue to change a behavior, where does that logic lead you?
It leads to people thinking they can play God. It leads to psychosurgery.
It leads to the lobotomy. This is where the mapping of the human takes a very dark, very aggressive turn. We shift from the careful, if tragic, experiments on epilepsy to an attempt to edit the personality of the mentally ill.
The outline points to a specific inspiration for this, something about chimpanzees.
Yes. It's 1935. A Portuguese neurologist named Egas Moniz is attending a conference in London. He sits in on a presentation about 2 chimpanzees named Becky and Lucy.
Becky and Lucy.
Now, Becky was a difficult chimp. If she made a mistake on a test, she would throw a violent temper tantrum, screaming, defecating, thrashing around. The researchers decided to remove her frontal lobes. And she became calm. She was docile. She would make a mistake and just sit there peacefully. The anxiety, the frustration, it was all gone.
And Moniz sees this and thinks, I can do this for humans.
He makes a leap that is scientifically reckless, but historically hugely consequential. He hypothesizes that mental illness in humans, anxiety, obsession, depression, is caused by fixed ideas circulating the frontal lobes like a broken record.
Like the burnt toast memory stuck on repeat.
Exactly. He thought if you could just cut the connection between the reasoning frontal lobes and the emotional limbic system, you could short-circuit the anxiety. You could cure the madness by cutting the wire.
So he invents the leucotomy,
which later evolves into the lobotomy. He used a tool called a leucotome, basically a wire loop like a fancy cheese slicer, to core out chunks of white matter in the frontal lobes.
And the medical establishment, surely they recoiled in horror. I mean, you're coring out brains based on a single chimp experiment.
You would hope so. But it was quite the opposite. Egas Moniz won the Nobel Prize for this in 1949.
Wait, he won a Nobel Prize for the lobotomy?
We have to understand the context here. We can't just look at this as evil doctors. This is the 1940s. Asylums were overflowing. There were no effective antipsychotic drugs yet. Thorazine hadn't been invented. You had patients who were living in squalor, strapped to beds, screaming in agony for years on end.
So the doctors were just desperate.
They were desperate for a biological cure. They saw localization as the roadmap to salvation. They thought, we have a map now. If the anxiety lives in this circuit and we cut the circuit, we save the patient from a life of misery.
It's the ultimate application of the brain as a machine metaphor. If the machine is making a bad noise, you just go in and cut the wire.
But as we know now, the brain isn't just a machine, it's a person. And the cure often meant stripping away the very essence of that person. It created lethargy, apathy, a profound loss of the very spark of selfhood. It's the shadow side of the confidence we gained from Gage and Penfield.
It's so interesting how this lecture circles back in slide 14. We return to Phineas Gage. Because growing up, the story I always heard was that Gage's life was ruined. He became a drifter, a circus freak, showed up the hole in his head for money, and died miserable. The moral was, you break the brain, you break the man forever.
Right. That was the determinism of early neurology. Structure is destiny. If your frontal lobe is mush, your life is mush. But modern research, some really excellent historical sleuthing, has uncovered a very different ending for Gage.
He didn't just drift.
No, he traveled. He went to Chile.
To do what?
To drive stagecoaches. For 7 years.
Okay, but driving a stagecoach, I mean, that doesn't sound like brain surgery.
Think about what that job actually entailed, though. Driving a stagecoach in 1850s Chile isn't like driving a Honda Civic on a paved highway. You are managing a 6-horse team. You are navigating rugged, dangerous mountain roads. You have to keep a strict schedule. You have to care for the animals. And you have to deal with paying passengers, some of whom don't even speak your language.
That requires planning. That requires impulse control. That requires social skills.
Exactly. All the things his frontal lobe injury was supposed to have permanently destroyed. If the part of the brain that handles executive function was truly gone and never came back, he shouldn't be able to do any of that. He should be chaotic. He should be unsafe. But he wasn't. He held down this very complex job for 7 years.
So he recovered.
He rehabilitated himself. And this introduces a concept that the early map makers like Gall and Penfield completely missed. Neuroplasticity.
The idea that the brain can change itself?
The brain is not a static map carved in stone. It's a dynamic landscape. It's more like clay. If a road gets washed out, like Gage's frontal lobe track, The brain can, with time and with effort, forge a new path. It can literally rewire itself.
So the self is resilient.
The self is incredibly resilient. Gage's real story teaches us that while the self is physical, while it is rooted in the meat of our brains, it's also adaptable. We aren't just at the mercy of our geography.
That's a hopeful note to start wrapping up on. We've gone from the fluid-filled ventricles where the soul supposedly swam around
To the hard deterministic map of phrenology.
to the electrical map of Penfield.
And finally to this idea of a plastic, rewiring brain.
Slide 15 summarizes this entire journey as the physical self. It feels like we've really moved the soul from the metaphysical clouds right down into the tissue.
We have, and that move came with a double-edged sword. It gave us the brilliance of Penfield's epilepsy cures, saving people like HM from seizures, even if the cost of that cure was terribly high. But it also gave us the hubris of the lobotomy, the arrogance to think we could just slice away the parts of the human experience we didn't like.
The visual for the conclusion is really interesting. It's a composite image, a neuron, a scalpel, and a giant question mark. And I love that question mark.
The question mark is crucial. It's the final provocation for you, for the listener. We spent this hour talking about the mechanics of the self. We know where memory lives, more or less. We know where speech lives. We know what happens when you put an iron bar through the planning department. But does finding the location of a memory explain the experience of it?
Right. You can point to the hippocampus on a chart and say, that's where the memory of my first kiss is stored. You can even see the neurons firing on an fMRI scan.
But seeing the neurons firing doesn't explain the feeling of the butterflies in the stomach. It doesn't explain the nostalgia. It doesn't explain the ghost. This is the biological soul paradox. We've mapped the house, we've checked the plumbing, we've tapped the walls, but we haven't quite explained the person living inside it yet.
That is a lot to chew on. From tamping irons to wire loops to the mystery of consciousness itself.
It's a heavy lecture, but it sets us up perfectly for next time. We've been looking at legitimate, if sometimes very aggressive medical treatment. We've been in the hospital, we've been dealing with licensed surgeons.
And next time we are leaving the hospital entirely.
We're going to the marketplace.
That's right. Lecture 14 is titled The Toadstool Millionaires, A History of Quackery.
We're going to look at the dark underbelly of medical consumerism, patent medicines, snake oil, radium water, and the psychology of selling a cure that doesn't actually exist.
I cannot wait. It sounds like a wild ride. Thank you so much for guiding us through the geography of the self today.
It was a pleasure. See you in the next lecture.
See you then.